Bonjour and welcome to episode 8 of the French Revolution vlogcast. Today we're looking at the complex and involved story of Louis XVI's demise from Easter 1791 through to January 1793. Our story starts in Easter 1791 with the visit to Rome of two of Louis XVI's aunts. They were going to Rome to celebrate Mass at the home of the Pope in the Vatican. And this was something that Louis had given his permission for. He'd signed the passports to allow them to leave France and was heavily criticised by the revolutionaries who felt that this was a betrayal of the new civil constitution of the clergy. This was part of the religious tension between Louis and the revolution really from the start. Added to which, Louis himself wanted to take a Catholic Mass in Easter 1791, and so he had planned to leave the Tuileries in the centre of Paris and journey out to a palace called, just outside Paris, called Saint-Cloud, or Saint Cloud, as you might see it written, where it would be a bit more discreet to have a Catholic priest in to do the job. He woke up and it was all prepared, and he came out to get in his carriage, and he found that sans-culottes had surrounded the gates of the Tuileries, and he could not leave. The National Guard were called, Lafayette came along, but still they could not get out, and this both shows the start of the sans-culottes trying to exercise influence over the revolution, and also the start of Louis' doubts that he can see out the revolution. Up till now, he's been sceptical, but has tried to sort of muddle along with it. I think from now, really, his position is one of opposition. So it's here that he starts to plan the flight to Varennes, as it's called. Of course, it's not the flight to Varennes, it's the flight that ends at Varennes. Varennes was on the way to the border from Paris, the nearest border from Paris, which is 200 miles, and Louis and his family fled in one large carriage, and that in itself is probably a mistake. The carriage was quite slow, and they got held up at various points along the way, and it was far too late by the time they reached Varennes for them to link up with the soldiers that were meant to be looking out for them. When they were brought back to Paris, not only had they failed to escape, but Louis had left behind not just a letter, but a 16-page document outlining why he felt the Constitution of 1791 was unworkable and why he was fundamentally opposed to the revolution. These things undermined the confidence of politicians in him, but they also started to be reported in the now uncensored press. And so opinion turned really against Louis. I think it's at this point that a lot of people start to see him as part of the problem rather than potentially part of the solution. And of course, in that context, you get 50,000 people turning up at the Champ de Mars to sign a petition proclaiming a republic. And there's that sort of nasty incident which ends in the Champ de Mars massacre. Lafayette and the National Guard have been going in to because a couple of people have been caught allegedly by the crowd on the Champ de Mars and have been hanged by them in an incident of mob justice, and so they were going to clear that up and to clear that out, but of course a riot ensues. They shoot back, and we don't know how many people killed, but I think it's kind of often put out a round figure, about 50 people were killed. This start of the story shows how Louis' actions led to the beginning of his demise. The next sort of phase, I would say, is where external events really accelerate that. So you get the Declaration of Pillnitz from Leopold I, the Emperor of Austria, Marie Antoinette's brother, trying to help really, and saying that it's his, if any harm comes to Louis and Marie Antoinette, then if the other powers of Europe agree, then he may intervene. Now, he said this knowing that Britain would not intervene. So it's a kind of a diplomatic slap, really, but nothing more than that. However, the way it's reported in Paris does make it sound extremely threatening, and it starts to generate fears that Louis has help from outside who are definitely coming to help, and it's kind of life or death, them or us. And this, of course, is what really leads to the sense that Louis must be executed, and that just letting him live in prison is not enough. And that's Declaration of Pillnitz is in August 1791. Over the next few months, a debate emerges in France about whether France should preempt any Austrian or Prussian invasion and start a war itself. And that, of course, reaches its culmination in April 1792 with the declaration of war by the French on the Austrians and the Prussians. And Louis is in favour of this because he thinks that France will probably lose the war and that will culminate there in him being restored to the throne. His backing, though, is always conditional, and that is shown by when the war starts badly, the Girondin ministers in his government try and bring in these new laws, one being quite nasty to priests and one establishing camps for armies around Paris, and Louis vetoes both of those laws. This leads to the invasion of the Tuileries, the first invasion of the Tuileries in June 1792. That invasion is a confrontation between the sans-culottes and Louis, which ends quite amicably, really. And Louis, probably for the first time, maybe for the only time, shows himself to be courageous and dignified and stands up to the crowd and puts on the old revolutionary hat and cockade, but explains why he's not going to remove the veto. But that incident again shows how the escalating and increased involvement of the sans-culottes, and also how this is becoming a more radical revolution. The harvest of 1791 had been poor, and once again in 1792 you see raised prices, which kind of increased tension amongst the ordinary people already, added to which the pressure and stress of the war going badly and the Austrians getting close. Those things were exacerbated in July 1792 by the Brunswick Manifesto. The Brunswick Manifesto, issued by the Duke of Brunswick, Prussian military commander, who says that he's coming to restore Louis and Marie Antoinette to their rightful monarchical headship of the country, and that anyone opposing that or causing harm to Louis and Marie Antoinette will be seen as being a military enemy. So he's basically saying that I'll kill civilians if I have to. Although this is intended to be helpful to Louis and to protect him and to encourage the moderates, in fact, what it seems to do is create a kind of momentum behind the sans-culottes and radical position, where they say, well, if we're going to be treated like rebels for acting against Louis and Marie Antoinette, then we might as well go the whole hog. And so they start to plan, and on the 10th of August 1792 execute what's called the storming of the Tuileries. It's a very carefully laid strategy whereby they seize control of the town hall, the Hotel de Ville, and then the Tuileries itself. The royal family removed from the Tuileries, as you probably know, and they're taken away to the Assembly. And actually, the storming of the Tuileries looked like for a while it might end quite peacefully, but then one of the Swiss Guards opens fires and they're massacred, and it's all kind of a horrible mess. It becomes really, I think, like a statement, really, a symbol of how the sans-culottes have seized control and how the revolution is entering its messiest and most violent phase. Because Louis is now under such pressure, he is, and the sans-culottes are putting on pressure to deal with him and to remove him from the situation. You actually see the end of the Legislative Assembly and the introduction of the National Convention, who then agree to put Louis on trial. And that trial takes place at the end of 1792. That culminates, that turns on two things. First of all, I was reading the other day, it said actually, because the war now ironically starts to go better for France with the victory at Valmy, actually Louis's position is weakened, because up to that point there had been a good argument for keeping him alive so that France had a kind of bargaining chip with their enemies. Now they're more confident that the war can be won, there's no need to keep hold of Louis. Secondly, when they storm the Tuileries, they find Louis's correspondence, and Louis's correspondence is quite condemnatory. It's clear from that he had been against the revolution from the start, no matter what he said, no matter what he'd gone along with, and that he would undo it if he could. And like I said earlier, he now becomes clear that Louis is part of the problem, not part of the solution. And it's at this point that really the vote kind of gets away from him. So in the vote at the end of the trial, it's I think 23 people abstained, but everyone who votes votes that Louis is guilty of treason against France, and then by one vote he is condemned to immediate execution. 288 people voted against the death penalty, 72 people voted against execution but with some delays or conditions upon it, 361 vote in favour, and one of those was Louis's cousin Philippe Égalité. Also, I think that any influence, therefore, that Sans-Culottes put on the National Convention and that vote, any votes that they sway, are critical because it is such a close vote. And in the end, he's executed very quickly then in January 1793. Just to summarise at the end then, why was Louis executed? Well, I think there's three main reasons, aren't there? Louis's actions himself, he undermines his position, he reveals himself quite openly to be against the revolution and to act against it. Secondly, circumstances, the war going badly doesn't help, and it creates fear amongst the population and the revolutionaries that things are going against them. And then thirdly, the increasing influence of the radical revolutionaries, the Sans-Culottes, the Cordeliers, who are involved in that storm of Tuileries, and of course the Jacobins, who use and agree with that position. I hope that's clear. Thanks so much. See you next time.